And what an amazing testimony to what God is doing in the Ivory Coast and all over the world. It's amazing what God is doing. And it's my great honor and joy this morning to introduce to you my dear friend and brother and our International Missions Director, Brother Clint Morgan.
Good morning, everyone. It is truly my privilege to be with you. If you have your Bibles, if you're open to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 4 through 9, and I'm going to do my best to get you out by 12. Is that fair? All right, 11:45. I'm not sure what you're looking for here. Okay, that's what I was waiting for right there, but I don't know. Everyone doesn't feel that way, but I hope most of you do. I want to share just a few things, first of all, about international missions and what's happening right now, and then we'll go to our message this morning. And thank you, Zach, and I do remember that day, and it was a beautiful day, wasn't it? And I was as surprised as they were, but overjoyed to see that Free Will Baptist Church coming up there and know that it was the previous Hannah Project that had led people to Christ, and now they were committed to carry on the gospel. Just a few things. We're really thankful for what God is doing around the world. Those who were here for the Sunday school class, you got to see a couple of things very specifically what He's doing. But let me say that on every field that we have, we're thankful and we're seeing people saved. Some fields are very bountiful in their harvest. As I shared this morning, in Kenya over the last couple of years, they've seen over 800 people come to Christ. In India, they average about 600 new believers every year, people getting baptized. That's one of our oldest fields. We're thankful for that. Then we see places like Japan that is very difficult. But last year, we saw the number of baptisms double in the country of Japan. We go, well, that's something. But it went from 6 to 13. But that is double. And I say, we can rejoice that in a very, very hard place that God is giving that harvest. And we just pray that it continues. I want to thank you for your support for David and Mimi and the other missionaries that you support. I was looking out there and I saw a couple of friends, the Williams, that work with Home Missions, the North American Ministries. I love Brian Williams and Mark and his family, Mark Nepple and his family. And thank you for what you're doing for missions. And I would just encourage you, Brother Tim, have missionaries in. As many as you can. You can't support everyone, but they will appeal to different ones for different reasons. And let people find their opportunity to be a part of what God is doing around the world through support. And it was by your support and those our other Free Will Baptists around the world, and especially here in the United States, that we can say that we ended the year 2017 in the black. And I can tell you, we went through about 6 years of red, and you just almost hated to read the financial report at the end of the year. The last 2 years, we've been able to end those years in the black, and we rejoice in that. But not only were we able to end the year in the black, but one of our commitments has been, once our general fund is met, we take whatever monies we can and help missionaries that are in the red, those that are in the deficit. And we were able to erase every deficit account that we had this year. It was over $300 and some thousand total of deficit accounts that we had above in undesignated giving for the general fund. So I want to thank you for what you give. Give to missionaries, give to the undesignated, give to a project, do something, be involved. And it is not, and I say this most sincerely, it is not about numbers, okay? It's not about how much you give, but it is about obedience giving. And that is, you go before God. I want you to go by the table out there. I have a couple of directories, and we can get plenty more if you need them. We have some maps that show you all of our missionaries. But the directories, I want to encourage every family to take at least one. This is my challenge to you. Take that directory, you go home, you go through that directory, you pray about the missionaries, read a little bit about the missionaries. If God lays one of them on your heart, you contact them, you learn more about them, and then you get involved in their lives and find out what God's doing through their lives. And if He leads you to give, give. He may lead you to pray, and if He leads you to pray, you pray. But I can tell you, every missionary out there needs your moral support. That's words of encouragement. That's something that everyone can do, no matter how rich or poor that you are, you can give. And the only thing really biblically that we can say solidly about giving, and that is that we give obediently. That's what He wants us to do. And we give with a joyful heart. And when you, I can tell you, if you give obediently, you will give with a joyful heart. Now you can give with the contrary spirit. You know, I don't really want to do this, but I'm sort of obligated, or my wife's making me, or my children are making me, or whatever you want to say. But I'm challenging you to really seek God's face about this. I am 100% convinced that if every Free Will Baptist person, every Free Will Baptist member, believer, gave obediently, we would have absolutely no problems in our churches supporting every program, every ministry that we have in our, and all of our mission programs, home and foreign mission, and all the other programs that we have. So that's my challenge to you, and that's, as far as God can say, that's all I'm going to say about that. So I'm just going to leave that go. But I do know that we have a great responsibility for the lost people around the world. Now, if you have your Bibles, if you're open to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and we will be reading from verses 4 through 9. Now, we could go back to chapter 1, but I'll just give you a summary of what happened in chapter 1. Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, and he said, I've heard there's a little rumor going around that there's some contention among you. And some of you are saying, I'm of Paul and I'm of Apollos. Paul asked a very interesting question there in chapter 1. He said, was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in his name? And obviously, the answer to that question is no. But you come to chapter 3, he goes at it in a different way. So I want us to read chapter 3, verses 4 through 9. For while one saith, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are ye not carnal? I'm going to stop there and pause and give you a very concrete example. It'd be like someone saying, well, I am a brother Tim. He led me to the Lord. Or Brother Zach led me to the Lord. Or Brother Dennis, I can say him because I know Morgan, and I love the name Morgan, so led me to the Lord. But, you know, we could say that way, or, you know, this is who, that's the context of this. And there's nothing wrong with that. And saying who led you to the Lord, but they become attached to them. And he said, who then is Paul? And who is Apollos? But ministers by whom ye believed, even as the Lord gave to every man. I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything. That's sort of tough, isn't it? And neither he that watereth. But God giveth the increase. Now, he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. So there was a very direct problem that they were facing in that church, and it was causing division among them. And they were lining up and behind Paul or behind Apollos or behind Cephas. And then we had the real pious crowd, if you read that, and we are of Christ. And, you know, that's the ones who really probably felt like they had it all together. Well, I'm not going to hang on to some old man. I'm going to tell you who I'm following. And in reality, they had it right. But that spirit of division does not have its place in God's work. Now, I want to tell you a story today, and this is sort of a drama. If you can think of it, we're going to look at a drama, and it has about 7 parts, some a little longer than others. But I'm going to tell you a story, and I hope that as we are going through this story, that you keep coming back to this thing. Paul planted, Apollos watered. Paul planteth, Apollos watered. Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. I hope these things sort of stick in your mind as you're going through this story. We'll begin. That's me, by the way. I did have black hair one time in my life. This was my wife and I, and we arrived in Africa in 1978, August of 1978. And when we arrived, we had these 2 cute little boys there. One was 4 and one was 2 years old. And that's how we began our ministry in Ivory Coast. Now, I have not always been that color nor this color, but when I turned about 25, 30 years old, I really started turning quickly. We came to the States. I went back to Ivory Coast. And over that year, I don't know what it was, but it was pretty rapid transformation there, the color. And I got back, and one of my African brothers looked at me and said, Pastor, you have cemetery flowers growing out of your head. Now, I don't know about you white-haired people like me, but, you know, I don't want to think of those as cemetery flowers. But that's what he said. We arrived on the field very young and enthusiastic and full of ambition and full of hope of what God would do. When we got there, we arrived in Dorpo, which is in the northeast corner of the country of Ivory Coast, at the hospital compound where my wife's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Laverne Miley, had opened the work there. So we walked right into this particular ministry there. We had an objective in that first term was to learn the Lobi language, learn the tribal language, and to learn a lot about the culture as we possibly could. Now, as when we arrived on the field, her parents were still there. We arrived in August and they left in December. We chased them away. Just kidding. No, we didn't want them to leave, but they left. But they left in December, and then we had another missionary couple, Sherwood and Veda Lee. Some of you remember them, and they left the next June. So here we were, rookie missionaries in June of 1979. Now we're in 1979, and we are there all alone, trying to run this hospital, trying to take care of these ministries. And trust me, it was not a great idea, but God knew what He was doing, so He left us there. And one of the things we did, as we were learning the language. There comes a time when you're learning the language, you hit a saturation point and you need a break. And we said, well, let's go visit some of our missionary friends. They lived about 50 miles away across the bush trails there. And we said, let's go visit them, spend an afternoon with them. So we gathered up in our Toyota Jeep stout, I'm telling you, that thing weighed, someone said maybe it was like a Humvee. That's about what it felt like. It was extremely heavy. But it was in rainy season. We thought we've got four-wheel drive. Everything's cool. We'll go across there. Won't have any problems. We make it all the way over to Bache. That's where we were going, the name of the village. We visited with this couple. They were from England, but they were getting ready to go back to the States. We went there for two reasons, to visit them and also to buy pork, because in the town we lived in Dorpo, you couldn't buy pork there. Just didn't have it. So we went down to the market in Bache looking for pork, and the pork was moving. You understand me? And so we just said, we will leave it there. We left the pork. We did not get pork. Went back to the house, had lunch with the Bellamy's. After we ate lunch, we said, well, we want to get back before dark. Now, in that 50 miles across that bush village roads that day, we had not seen one moving vehicle. Bicycles, yes, but no other cars, no other trucks, nothing. That's the kind of area it was, right? You've been there, Mr. Zach. I mean, you just don't see vehicles in there. So when we got ready to go, the Bellamy said, oh, well, we have two birds. We're going back to the States. Would your boys like parrots? They talk. And we thought, well, this is good. Now, you look at that, and you think of those boys 4 years old and 2 years old, and you offer them parrots. Now, they were 5 and 3 because it was next year. But you offer them parrots that talk. What do you think the answer is? Yes. So we take off back across that bush road, those bush roads, with we call them hello and goodbye, and I'll tell you why. Because when we were going across that road, every time we would hit a bump, we found out what their vocabulary was. Hello, goodbye, boom, hello, goodbye, and I was pretty sure the birds were not going to make it home. I mean, we were going to continue that. We got into one place, there's a big mud hole, and we get stuck in that mud hole. Now, we'd gone through that. It wasn't a mud hole. It was about 100 feet long. I don't know what you call it when it gets that long. But it was just mud streaked there. And we got in there, and we got stuck. And I thought, no problem. I get out. I lock in that four-wheel drive. I know we're going to, get right out of there. And what we did, by the way, you can get a four-wheel drive stuck, really stuck. Sit on the bottom stuck. We tried to dig it out, couldn't get it out. African men came out, they dug, and it was just like a slush pit. They went and got 2 oxen. They tied the oxen to the front of the Jeep. They couldn't pull it out with them. So we said, well, I think we're pretty well stuck here. And so we decided to walk home. We were about 10 kilometers from home then. So we got the boys out, and we started walking with the birds now. I don't know why in the world I took those birds, but we took the birds because the boys wanted them, I'm sure. And we prayed for a miracle. We really did. We asked God, would you please send a vehicle along, although we had not seen a vehicle all that day. And it was about that time we heard a truck coming. Yeah. I think it's been hit more times than Muhammad Ali, hasn't it? I mean. And so we heard this truck coming, but I'm telling you, that day it was a sound of rejoicing. And it was the bread truck driver. In our area had one bakery within 50 miles, and they would bake the bread in the morning, and they'd take it to the villages, and they would sell it. So he's coming by he had sold the bread, and now he's headed back to his town, to Buna, which was 50 miles south of us. He stops, and there we are, and they have an expression in Africa: if you see a white man walking, there's a reason. He just doesn't walk for the fun of it, you know. So we were walking, and we had a reason in our vehicle. He said, "That's your vehicle back there?" And that, you know, you don't slap people. Of course it's my vehicle back there. And now he had gone through the same mud hole with this thing. You know, that doesn't make sense, does it? How in the world he did that? But he said, "Can I take you home?" We said, "Sure." We get in the vehicle. Lynette and my two boys, they get up front with the driver. I get in the back with "Hello, goodbye." You know, so all the way home, you know, boom, boom, boom. That's what we have. So this guy really came to our rescue that day, and that was in June of 1979. And we'll pull the curtain on stage one. After we learned the language, we went on and saw that if we're going to reach people, a great principle of missions, wherever you go, is you go where people are, or you create events where people will come to you. If you're going to meet people, you've got to have either you got to go places where they are or bring them to you. The market is the place in Africa. It is the place where people gather. They'll walk, honestly, 10 miles to get to a market. So we chose 5 markets in our area, and we would go to those marketplaces, and we would present the gospel there. Now, I'm going to tell you about one village because it has a long story with it. The name of that village, and I want you to sort of hold on to that name, and just to keep you awake, I'll ask you to repeat this name several times, okay? The name of the village is Nyamwe. Some of you are already sleeping. I said I want you to repeat that, okay? Nyamwe, say it. There's, you know. So that's the village. So in this particular village, though, what we would do when we went out on the Market Day Ministries, we'd get 4 poles, literally, and we'd stick them in the ground. We'd tie some more poles across, then we'd put straw on it. We'd have a little table under there, and we'd stand under that straw hut, or whatever you want to call it, lean-to, and then we'd preach the gospel from 9 in the morning to about 3 in the afternoon. And people would come by, you know, and we'd talk and we engaged people. And the great thing about that was a lot of people came there, but you'd see the same people over and over again. So you could talk to them, and they'd come back and they'd ask questions. So we had repeated exposure to them. Now, one of the villages we went to was the village of Yamwe. Now, it was interesting when we went to this village of Yamwe. It was a beautiful village, a big village. And when we went there, people, they would tell us, they said, you know, the things that you're telling us, we've heard these things before. And they said there was a missionary and his wife that used to come through here. His name was, well, they couldn't remember his name, but they said in his wife, and they would come through here and they would preach. And, you know, he would tell us these same things, and she would help us, you know, take care of us. Realized that was Eddie and Sandra Payne, some of our former missionaries. And they would go through there, and also heard about Sherwood Lee and an African brother that would come through there and preach. So they had heard some of the gospel. Remember the verses. Paul planted, Apollos watered. Okay. I went to Eddie one time and I told him, I said, "Eddie, I just want to tell you thank you." And he said, "For what?" I said, "For all the planting that you did in the villages around here." And I remember what he said, and it was a very moving statement. He said, "You know, it seems like all my ministry's been planting. I wish I could be there just one time when the harvest came in." And his wife asked a very thought-provoking, not meant to be mean, but a very thought-provoking question. And she said, "Eddie, do you think you could harvest as humbly as you have sown?" That's a good question. We all want to be there when the harvest. 3,000 souls, 700 to 800 souls in Kenya. You know, I'd love to be there. I'd love to be a part of that. But we need to understand, and I told him how much we appreciated that. Moving along, we left Dorpo in 1985, that village up in the northeast corner, moved 50 miles south, opened a Bible Institute so we could train leaders for our churches. That was a very, very, very heavy program for them. They would come, start classes on Monday morning, go all the way to Friday noon. They got on little mopeds, and they would go out into the villages 2 by 2, and they would preach. Now, one of the villages that they went to was the village of, now see if you're remembering and awake, Nyamwe. They went to the village of Nyamwe. God continued to bless that ministry. It began to multiply. They were seeing people saved there, and so we thank the Lord for their ministry there. But something really strange happened around the year 2000. There was a group that came in there very, very charismatic, and I mean militant charismatic, and telling people, you know, number one, if you don't speak in tongues, you're not saved, and if you go to that church over there, you're going to die and go to hell. Well, you know, that's not a really good choice to make. But I will tell you, it was amazing the damage they did to that church. Our Bible Institute students were faithful in teaching the Word there, but that fear came over those people, and by the year 2000, quite frankly, we just really didn't even have a church there anymore. And the way it came and went, I just could hardly believe that. Now, something happened in 2002. You probably heard a little bit about it. There was a civil war that broke out in the country. Civil war broke out in 2002. The country was completely divided, the North and the South. The government was ruling the South, and the rebels were ruling the North. Now, that area that was controlled by the North is where most of our Free Will Baptist churches are. That's where Yumway is. That's where these other villages are. We went to... we would go back in. I would go back in from time to time to teach at our Bible Institute. I don't have time to tell you those stories of what it was like to go through those stops and places, those police stops where there were rebels there. Young men, sometimes teenagers on drugs and AK-47s and love to intimidate you. And no one ever beat us up or anything like that. But they did everything they could to intimidate us and make life miserable for us. Take out our suitcases and dump them on the ground and then make you pick them up and, insult you. And what are you doing here? And I came to tell people about Jesus. No one cares about Jesus, I mean, they were just a lot of things like that. But that whole area there was cut off. And in 2005, a meningitis epidemic broke out in the northern part there around Dorpo and where we had lived. Over 300 people died in just a matter of days over this meningitis epidemic. We're sitting back in the States with the Hannah Project that just started. We said, we can do something about this. So we got together a team of 20 volunteers, and we went to Ivory Coast under the name of the Hannah Project, and we went up to that area, back to Dorpo, in order to vaccinate people against meningitis. It was still tense enough. We had to have a United Nations military escort to take that group up into Dorpo. Now, I don't know what you think about the United Nations, and I won't comment on a whole lot, but there are a lot of chickens there, I can tell you that. They took us up there, they did their duty, and as soon as we went through that gate, they turned around and went right back. I mean, we said, don't you guys want to hang around a little bit here? And I mean, they were gone. But we took that team of 20 people, and with this group of 20, in 6 days, or just really 6 days of intense work, we vaccinated 12,000 people against meningitis. 12,000. Now, we go to the village, and when we went into a village with the vaccines, we would go in and we would preach first. Now, one of the villages we went to was the village of, and you're still with me? Yemwe. We went to Yemwe. And that day after preaching, when it was finished, there were about 5 or 6 people who came up to me and they said, Pastor, we are part of the group that was Free Will Baptist in this village. And we still want to be Free Will Baptist. Will you come back and work with us? And I told them, I said, I don't live here anymore, but we have national pastors, and I'll ask them to come and take care of you and continue the ministry here. And they said, I went and talked to the national pastors, and they said they would. But think about that, 12,000 vaccinations in just that short period of time. And I tell you, there was a miracle that happened in one of those times we were out vaccinating, and we had enough, we knew, to do 150 people. And on that day, we vaccinated over 200 and some people. We know God truly multiplied in a way that I can't explain it other than God did it, and we saw people's lives moved. But in Yemwe, God was bringing up that church again. So we went to our national leaders and we asked them if they would go back and they would continue the ministry there. And they said yes. They started going back. We went back in 2007 in this little group of 5, and it's now 15, 20 people. We were very excited about what God was doing there. We went back in 2008, and now the group is running about 50. So God is working, and these national leaders are winning people to Christ. They're baptizing them. This was a baptism. You go down and baptize them. So they're getting excited. Now, their churches at that point were just wooden poles or tree, stuck in the ground, and then they put straw across the top of them, and they would meet in them. But the village people there at Yemwe, many of them were still very resistant. They were non-Christian, so many of them were resistant to the gospel. The charismatic group had long gone. So they were but the village people were resistant, and they kept burning the straw off of these little meeting places that they had. But in 2008, we went back, and then we went back in 2009. And they said, the village people have burned down several of our buildings here, or these little straw huts things that we're making here. What we want to do is we want to build a cement building, put a tin roof on it, and we believe that, maybe that'll keep people from burning it down again. But then they asked me to do something. They said, there's a regional king in this area, and we'd like for you to go talk to him and ask him if we can, if he would put his protection on this building. Now, understand he's a pagan king. But I said, yeah, I'll be glad to do that. So we were walking over to visit the village, this regional king. And as we were walking along, the pastor with me said, by the way, Pastor, do you know what this king, what he used to do? Now, does anyone want to take a shot at what this guy did before he became king? He was the bread truck driver. And, there were 2 bread truck drivers, so I thought, well, maybe this isn't the one. So we went through all the greetings and the formal things that go on in the culture there. And really, you do not speak directly to a king, you speak to a spokesperson. But at any time in the conversation, the king can point at you and he would say, Mike, how are you doing? And if he speaks to you directly now, you can speak directly to the king. So we went through all the formalities, and this king sitting there, he sees me, and he obviously recognizes me, but we go through the formal part first, and then he points at me and he says, Pastor, how are you doing? This is all in French, of course. I said, I'm doing fine. How are you? And, we chatted a little bit, and I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, do you remember back about 30 years ago on the road to and he just started laughing. He said, oh, Pastor, he said, I remember you and those boys and those birds, and he went on. Now, let me tell you something. 30 years earlier, when we're going down that road and we get stuck and we're out there walking and we're riding in the back of that truck, I'm not thinking 30 years ahead. I had no idea what was going to happen. But God did. God saw that, and he put that man in a place of power at that particular time. And I'm going to ask you a question. This is a very important question. What are the chances that 30 years later, this guy who's driving a truck is sitting in the place of a regional king? What are the chances? And I'm going to give you the answer to that question. 100%. You understand what I'm saying? We serve a God who sees all, knows all, plans all, moves all. God knew exactly in June of 1979 where I would be sitting almost in June of 2009, and then sitting there talking to this man who understood that story. The next year we were able to go back in 2010. We had dedication. There were, several hundred people there gathered around. And the king came, by the way, out of respect for us. And he sat and he listened to the story that I just told you. And you can go to Yumway today, and I will tell you, you will find a church that is vibrant and growing, and God continues to bless that. But God had that all in his plan all along. Now, we're going to do something that's good for you Baptists. We can understand this. Now, we're going to use our imagination a little bit here. Let's say we're all going to die. We know that. Or he's going to come back. But one day we're going to go before judgment, and we're going to be judged for everything that we've done, right? All sins are forgiven. Sins are going to be washed away. I don't think they're going to be mentioned at all. If they're forgiven, if you've repented, they're gone. He can't bring them up again. But he's going to ask us about our lives, and we're going to be judged for that. Now, please don't think of me pretentious, but just follow the story with me for a little bit. Say I go before God, and he says, Clint, I sent you to Yumway back in 1979, in Market. And how many people did you lead to me during that time? And I would feel pretty good. I could honestly say probably 20 or 30 people I personally led to Christ in the village of Yumway. Does that sound good? Now, don't get upset at me, okay, yet. But that 20 or 30 people, and let's imagine that we're on this stage here, and these 20 or 30 people from Yumway come around and gather, and you go, wow, boy, that's pretty good. But let's be honest and stop and think about what happened in this story. Because then Eddie and Sandra Payne come up. Remember them? Sherwood and Beta Lee and those that went with them. You remember them because they preached in the village of Yumway. And then think about the Bible Institute students. They've got to come because they were a part of what God was doing there. And then the Hannah Project team, those group of 20 people, they're going to come up because they're part of what God did there. You know, and then the national church leaders that took over the work and are carrying on the work even today, they're going to be there. And every one of you who prayed for us, and every one of you who gave any money, and every one of us who were part of that ministry anyway, you're going to be there. I hope you're getting what I'm saying. You begin to feel very, very small. Right? You understand what I'm saying? It's not our work. He said, Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the increase. It is God's harvest. It's not my harvest. It is His. And the question that we want to ask ourselves today is, what is my role in reaching the unreached? What is my role? Maybe God wants you out there plowing up the ground, taking out the rocks, pulling out the thorns, preparing the ground just so the seed can go in the ground. Maybe He wants you to be the one that puts the seed in the ground. And we know we're talking spiritual metaphor here, but you can go put that seed in the ground. Or someone else, you may be the one that comes along and waters it. Or you may be the one that's privileged to be there at the harvest time. But remember, if you are, it is not your harvest. It is His. He brings the increase. But what I want to challenge you today is that you say, God, what is my role in reaching the unreached? Where do you want to use me? Because I believe firmly that He has a role for every born-again believer in this whole process of planting, watering, and harvesting. And you say, Lord, what do you want me to do? And that is what He calls you to be faithful to. Not my job, not Brother Tim's job, but what does He want you to do? What is your role in this harvest that God is preparing for us? And that's my question to you today. And I want you to think about that. Say, God, what do you want me to do? Let's pray.